The scream cut through the summer air like a snapped wire as Noah Kensington vanished beneath the glittering surface of the billionaire's garden pool, and the laughter that followed landed like a punch to the chest. Noah, a 10-year-old boy with gentle eyes and a careful way of moving through the world, had been standing at the edge moments before, counting tiles under his breath to stay calm, when a careless shove sent him tumbling forward, shoes and all. The party froze in pieces rather than all at once, some guests gasping, some staring, some pretending not to see, because discomfort often hides behind silence when money and status are involved. Noah's hands flailed beneath the water as noise and color overwhelmed him, the echoing splash magnifying his fear, his body locking as panic stole the rhythm he relied on to feel safe. Across the lawn, adults argued about whose child had pushed him, voices overlapping, excuses forming faster than responsibility, while the boy struggled unseen beneath reflections of champagne flutes and designer shoes. Amara Lewis, a 14-year-old black girl standing near the fence in a borrowed dress, noticed the wrongness immediately because she had learned to read danger without being invited to speak. She had been brought to the party as an afterthought, a +1 to help serve drinks, already used to being overlooked, already used to watching carefully because attention was rarely given freely to girls like her. Amara saw the rigid panic in Noah's movements, the way he did not thrash wildly but sank, overwhelmed, and she understood in an instant that waiting for permission would be too slow. Someone shouted for a lifeguard who was nowhere nearby, someone else laughed nervously and said boys would be boys, and the delay stretched long enough to become deadly. Amara dropped her tray without asking, shoes skidding on wet stone, and ran, her heart pounding not with fear but with clarity. She did not scream, she did not hesitate, she did not look to see who was watching, because courage rarely asks for approval. She dove straight into the pool, the cold shocking but grounding, cutting through chaos as she reached Noah with deliberate calm. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder, slowed her movements, and guided him upward, speaking softly so only he could hear, counting with him, matching his breath, giving him the structure he needed to survive the moment. When they broke the surface together, the crowd inhaled as one, shock replacing indifference, and suddenly everyone remembered how to care. Amara held Noah until his feet found the steps, until his breathing steadied, until the world felt less loud again, and only then did she let go. The billionaire father pushed through the crowd too late, guilt written across his face, while whispers spread about the girl who had moved when others froze. Water dripped from Amara's hair onto the stone as she stood quietly beside Noah, unseen strength settling back into stillness, knowing she had done what needed to be done. If moments like this move you, take a second to subscribe, because this story is only beginning. And if you believe courage should never be ignored, comment where you are watching from, because what happens next will force everyone at that party to confront who they truly are. The silence that followed Noah Kensington's rescue was thicker than the humid summer air, because everyone at the billionaire's garden party now understood how close they had come to witnessing a tragedy they were unprepared to take responsibility for. Noah stood shivering by the pool steps, water dripping from his sleeves, his small hands clenched as he tried to regulate his breathing, his eyes darting between faces that suddenly felt too loud and too close. Amara Lewis stayed beside him instinctively, positioning herself slightly in front of his body like a shield, her own heart still racing beneath her calm expression, because she knew that danger did not always end when the water was left behind. Guests began speaking all at once, voices overlapping with excuses and nervous laughter, some insisting it had been an accident, others blaming children they knew would never face consequences, because wealth often softened truth before it could land. The billionaire father finally reached his son, dropping to his knees in panic and relief, pulling Noah into his arms while murmuring apologies that came too late to erase the fear already etched into the boy's memory. Doctors were called, towels appeared, and staff rushed to perform care that should have happened sooner, yet Amara noticed how no one looked directly at her, how gratitude moved around her instead of toward her, as if acknowledging her courage would mean acknowledging their own failure. One woman whispered that Amara should not have jumped in without permission, another muttered that it was dangerous for a girl like her to cause a scene, and the words strung sharper than the cold water ever had. Amara said nothing, because she had learned that silence was often forced on those who spoke the truth too early. Noah, however, reached out suddenly and grabbed the edge of Amara's wet sleeve, grounding himself through touch, his fingers trembling but determined, and in that small gesture the world paused again. He looked up at her and spoke softly, thanking her in a voice barely louder than the wind, and the sincerity in his words cut through the noise like a blade. The billionaire father noticed then, really noticed, and his eyes followed his son's gaze to the girl standing soaked and shaking in borrowed clothes. He stood slowly, shame and confusion battling across his face, as he realized the child everyone had ignored was the one who had saved his son's life while the powerful hesitated. Around them, guests grew quiet, phones lowering, conversations dying, because the truth was becoming impossible to avoid. Amara felt the weight of those stares now, not the dismissive kind, but the uncomfortable ones that come when privilege is forced to look at courage it did not expect. Noah squeezed her sleeve again, steadier now, and leaned into his father's side, his breathing finally calm, his eyes clearer, the panic replaced with safety. The party music had stopped completely, champagne glasses sat untouched, and a celebration meant to display wealth had turned into a mirror reflecting character instead. If you are still watching this unfold and feel the tension settling in, take a moment to subscribe, because what comes next will expose more than one truth hidden behind luxury. And if you have ever seen bravery ignored because of who showed it, comment where you are watching from, because the next chapter will force a reckoning no amount of money can silence. The reckoning began not with shouting, but with an uneasy stillness that spread across the garden, as if the party itself had realized it no longer belonged to the people who paid for it. Because Noah Kensington's quiet grip on Amara Lewis's sleeve had shifted the balance of power in a way money never could. The billionaire father remained standing, his hand resting on Noah's back, but his posture had changed, no longer towering and confident, instead uncertain, as if he was seeing his world from a lower angle for the first time. Noah leaned slightly toward Amara again, not hiding but anchoring himself, because her calm had become his safe place in a room full of noise and judgment. Amara felt every eye on her now, not celebratory, not grateful, but assessing, measuring, trying to decide how to place her back into the box she had just shattered. A man in a linen suit cleared his throat and said someone should speak to the child who pushed Noah, but his words drifted without direction, because accountability feels heavier when it might land on the powerful. Another guest suggested quietly that perhaps Noah should not have been near the pool at all, and the implication hung in the air like a familiar accusation that the vulnerable should adapt rather than the careless be corrected. Amara's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent, knowing this moment was not about proving herself, but about refusing to disappear. Noah's father finally spoke, his voice low but carrying, and he asked plainly who had pushed his son, not angrily but with a seriousness that stripped away excuses. A pause followed, long and uncomfortable, as parents glanced at their children and then away again, and in that silence guilt moved like a shadow across polished shoes. One boy stepped back behind his mother, another stared at the ground, and the truth became visible without needing to be shouted. Noah flinched at the sudden movement around him, overwhelmed again, and instinctively Amara shifted closer, lowering herself slightly so he did not feel crowded, counting softly under her breath until his shoulders relaxed. The billionaire father watched this, really watched it, and something in his expression broke open because he saw not just bravery but understanding, a kind of care his wealth had never taught him. He thanked Amara then, clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear, and the word thank you landed hard in the air, forcing people to acknowledge what they had avoided. Some guests nodded stiffly, others looked away, because gratitude towards someone they had dismissed was uncomfortable. Amara met his eyes and nodded once, not smiling, not seeking praise, because she had not jumped into the pool for recognition, but for life. The staff lingered at the edges, whispers spreading, phones half raised again, because this was no longer a private moment, but a public truth. Noah looked up at his father and said he liked Amara's voice because it made the noise go away, and the simplicity of that sentence silenced the garden more effectively than any speech. The billionaire father swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat, and placed a protective arm around his son, finally understanding that protection is not about walls or wealth, but about people who act when others freeze. Around them, the party felt smaller, stripped of illusion, as if luxury itself had been exposed as fragile. If you are still with this story and feel the weight of what is unfolding, take a moment to subscribe, because the final chapter will bring justice, recognition, and a lesson that lingers long after the water dries. And if you believe courage should never depend on status, comment where you are watching from, because what happens next will show who truly belongs at the center of this story. The final truth settled over the garden like a slow sunrise, impossible to ignore and impossible to reverse. As Noah Kensington stood calmer now with Amara Lewis beside him, and the billionaire's world quietly rearranged itself around that simple fact. The father took a deep breath and addressed the guests, his voice steady but stripped of performance, admitting that what had happened was not an accident but a failure of responsibility, supervision, and courage, and the words landed harder because they were finally honest. He said that his son's autism did not make him fragile but made him honest, and that honesty had exposed how quickly people protected comfort instead of life. He turned then to the parents of the child who had pushed Noah, and instead of anger he demanded accountability, not quietly, not privately, but clearly, because silence was what had almost cost him everything. The parents faltered, excuses forming and dying mid-sentence, and for the first time money did not smooth the moment away. Staff members stood taller, guests shifted uncomfortably, and the party no longer felt like a stage, but like a reckoning. The father announced that the gathering was over, that there would be consequences, and that his home would not host comfort built on cruelty again. He then did something no one expected. He invited Amara forward, not as a servant, not as an afterthought, but as the center of the truth that had just been revealed. Amara hesitated, instinct telling her to step back, because recognition had never been safe before, but Noah reached for her hand without fear, grounding her the way she had grounded him, and together they took a few steps forward. The father thanked her again, not with grand promises, but with respect, acknowledging that she had shown courage adults with power had failed to show. He said that her action would not be forgotten, not quietly, not conveniently, but publicly, and that he would fund water safety training and autism awareness programs led by people who understood vulnerability rather than spoke over it. Amara listened, her chest tight, not from pride but from relief, because for once the burden had not been shifted back onto her shoulders. Guests began to applaud, hesitant at first and then stronger, not celebration but recognition, and the sound felt different because it was earned. Noah smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes when the world finally makes sense again, and he leaned into Amara's side, safe and unafraid. The sun dipped lower, reflections dancing across the pool that had nearly taken him, now quiet and harmless, and the garden looked changed, as if truth had altered its shape. Amara felt the moment settle, knowing that she would return to being overlooked tomorrow, but also knowing that today mattered, that she had mattered, and that courage leaves marks even when it does not ask to. As people began to leave, conversations hushed and thoughtful, one truth remained clear, that real bravery does not ask who is important, it asks who is in danger. And the lesson of that day echoed beyond the garden, that when prejudice freezes people in place, courage often comes from the ones no one thought to watch, and that saving a life sometimes means diving in before the world decides you belong there.